questions during the if you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the chat box. You can also introduce yourself and your affiliation if you would like in the chat as well. Our first afternoon presentation is This Is Your Wave on Karst by Forrest Yankee, the program coordinator for Crawford Stewardship Project. He keeps busy on a wide range of projects involving grassroots networking and cross-organizational coordination, research and education, public speaking and community organizing, and more. Forrest was born in a barn and grew up on Dancing Waters Permaculture Cooperative at the headwaters of West Fork of Knapp's Creek, tromping around in the hills and bluffs of the driftless. After graduating from North Crawford High School in Crawford County, he went to Eckerd College in Florida, where he graduated with a degree in communications, minoring in international studies and global affairs and Spanish. He has traveled through 26 countries on 3 continents, rounding out his education and helping him appreciate our special region for what it is. Forrest has a passion for the beauty of this area and is dedicated to helping folks engage to protect the values and rights of our communities and ecosystems. I now welcome Forrest to take it from here.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Great. So, as they mentioned, this is Forrest Yankee. I'm the program coordinator for Crawford Stewardship Project, here with my co-coordinators, Omaru and Eli, who will introduce themselves later and take you through some of the next parts of the presentation. I want to welcome everybody. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks to the WAV program coordinators and the DNR, UW Extension, UW Stevens Point for having the flexibility to make this all happen online. So we're really happy to be able to still be a part of this and make this happen. Today we'll be talking a little bit about the connections of the surface and groundwater in a driftless karst landscape like we have here in southwestern Wisconsin, talking about that hydrogeology, moving on to how that connects with our water quality monitoring program, which has been a core pillar of Crawford Stewardship Project's work for the last decade. And finally, we'll be broadening the conversation to talk about some of the connections with land uses and values and the prior information we've discussed. So, thanks again. You can move on to the next slide. Crawford Stewardship Project has been working on these things for well over a decade. We're focused on the karst geology because this is really impactful for all the different focuses that we have, which are environmental justice, sustainable land and water use, and local control of natural resources. So for those of you who don't know what karst is yet, although finally it's been getting some attention, karst refers to ancient carbonate bedrock at its most basic. And in this area of southwestern Wisconsin, in the driftless area, where the glaciers did not plane everything flat, this landscape has been slowly eroded and dissolved by the water flow over the last 500 million years. And the carbonate bedrock layers we have here are dissolved by the carbonic acid in the rain, which over long periods of time, slowly but surely makes these fracture patterns that you can see in the diagram here, as well as some larger solution features like the caves and the underground rivers that then come out to the surface. So we have plenty of information to tell us that this is a very complicated landscape, and we hope that there will be more studies coming soon that will give us more detailed knowledge about this information. So we can move on to the next slide, please. Some of the karst features we see on this landscape. To the left is a picture of a quarry face, which are great cross sections of your local bedrock. In that picture, you can see there are those same horizontal fractures as well as vertical fractures that would go down directly into the groundwater. And on the diagram, we have labeled some of those other features. On the surface, we have sinkholes and blind valleys, stream sinks of some caves that reach the surface. And then those are all the seepage points that can lead directly into the bedrock and then later flow back into the surface through springs and into the rivers and streams that we have in this area. Next slide, please. So sinkholes are some of the most common features we have or that we see on the landscape. They're the result of collapsed underground caves or cavities and then keep evolving through the years. The picture here is of an old, very large sinkhole. There's also smaller sinkholes, some that change every year and are developing very quickly, others that are thousands of years old and relatively stable. Next slide. Caves are another example of these karst features. Some, like this one, reach the surface and we get to see them, and people have aged cheese and stored things in caves for many centuries, and many we do not know of and are locked beneath the ground and not accessible by the surface. And there's some of the more significant features in this area, especially in the older karst layers of bedrock. There are large caves. Next slide, please. And springs are very important to us. Springs are the point where groundwater becomes surface water. And as you can see in these two pictures, they take many shapes and forms, sometimes shooting straight out of the hill, sometimes bubbling up through the sand in streams. And they are what feeds all our cold water streams and rivers and keep our oxygen levels high and hopefully everything healthy if there's not contaminants going into them. And if anyone has any specific questions on any of these features or information, we're going through a lot of information pretty quickly in this, so please feel free to type in your comments or questions in the box and we'll try to get to them as we see them and it seems to fit into the presentation. Next slide, please. So placing ourselves a little bit, where is there karst? Short answer, it's all over the world. Here in the US, you can see that it's in patches of different kinds of karst, different kinds of carbonate bedrock. In Wisconsin, you can see here there's a belt sort of wrapping around the eastern, southern, and western portions of the state. Roughly a third of Wisconsin has some amount of carbonate bedrock underlying it. Next slide, please. So here zooming in onto Wisconsin a little bit more and the different carbonate layers we have here. You'll see in eastern Wisconsin, there's the Silurian dolomite, which was recently protected with some additional manure spreading and storage restrictions to try to deal with some of the groundwater issues and drinking water issues they're facing there. Moving west, we have along the eastern and southern portion of the state, the emerald green mottled portion, which is in this called the Sinope group, and that's the Platteville-Galena limestone. And then finally, and most significantly for us in southwestern and western Wisconsin, is the Prairie du Chien dolomite in the light blue there. And those are in order of age as well. So the Prairie du Chien dolomite, the light blue, is the oldest, second oldest is the green, and the youngest is in the east. And that has implications for how karstified, shall we say, how big those fractures and openings have developed over the years. Also, I'd like to point your attention to the little box on the bottom. That is a cross section of southern Wisconsin, and you can see there the slope of the bedrock underlying us, and that here in southwestern Wisconsin, we have very slightly westward and slightly south sloping bedrock layers, and that has implications for where what direction underground water could potentially flow. Next slide, please. Great. So zooming in once again, here is southwestern Wisconsin, centered around Crawford County, our base of operations. This is a little bit more detail on those same bedrock layers. You can see here in the red is that Platteville Galena limestone. In the orange is the Prairie du Chien dolomite. Sandwiched in between those is a layer of sandstone, and the bottom layer, the green, is the Jordan sandstone, which for us here and for most people here makes up our aquifer. Most people are drinking out of that sandstone layer, and that makes the Jordan aquifer is one of the best and most prolific aquifers in the world. And we hope to keep it that way because it's also very sensitive, as should become clear as we continue talking about these sensitivities and direct conduits into our groundwater. Next slide, please. So there's been lots of study of the karst bedrock in eastern Wisconsin and not as much in southern and western Wisconsin. There's actually a great lack of local information on karst features in this area. And so we, after years of asking someone to do the study, decided to take it up ourselves, got a few grants, and launched our Karst Landscapes and Groundwater Susceptibility Survey of Crawford County. One of the aspects that we decided was important was mapping karst features, sinkholes being the easiest to do for us. We used mainly the LiDAR data. The base layer of this map is very detailed elevation data created by LiDAR imagery, they flew airplanes over the area and took imagery that stripped off the surface vegetation and gave us this imagery. And we used that and the aerial imagery along with a host of dedicated citizen scientists and Professor Kelvin Rodolfo to go through and identify over 450 sinkholes in Crawford County alone of at least 2 feet in depth. Now, moving on to the next slide, we generalized that data a little bit, knowing that we were not mapping all the sinkholes in the county and that the best evidence for sinkholes is other sinkholes. The best evidence for that seriously fractured carbonate bedrock are those surface features that we have. So using that, we made a sinkhole heat map showing concentrations of sinkholes in various areas of the county, which then allows us to have a basic vision of what areas we might expect to be more susceptible to surface waters very quickly becoming groundwater and potentially contaminating the groundwater in the area. Next slide, please. We also mapped karst fracture patterns, and this was done again by looking at that same LiDAR elevation data. When you first look at the landscape, it looks pretty much dendritically created and formed by erosion. Dendritic refers to sort of how roots or branches form, and you can see the natural erosion patterns there. However, a more skilled set of eyes like Kelvin's can really pick out almost a trellis pattern as well, where you see more recurrent directions of valleys and hilltops, and those helped us map the likely directions that the fractures of those underground layers of bedrock take. And that again would have implications for thinking about where and what direction groundwater could be flowing. In this image here, you'll see there's actually 2 kinds of carbonate bedrock shown. Most of it is that Prairie du Chien dolomite, which we found 2 directional patterns in. And in the bottom left corner, there's a blob of the Platteville Galena limestone, which is very close to the surface. And we found lots of different directional patterns, a little bit more complicated than the prairie du Chien dolomite. Next slide, please. So finally, we looked into well construction reports as a part of our survey. This again was done with the help of our citizen scientists and Professor Kelvin Rodolfo. Well construction reports are some of the few good data points that we have into our bedrock. These are the well drillers, if they're doing a good job, make good notes about what depth they encounter different bedrock. And this allowed us to look at where or how many points that go through carbonate bedrock have these sorts of either caves or fractures or crumbled limestone, or evidence that it would be easy for water, groundwater, to flow quickly and without the sort of natural remediation that might happen in other kinds of bedrock or going through soil. So to explain this graph a little bit, we eliminated all wells that were not drilled by Corpian because they did not take scientifically usable notes. Fortunately, Corpian did most of the wells in the area. We then looking only at a subset of those that went through any amount of carbonate bedrock in the Packer colors there. We found that 28% of wells drilled through even a small amount of carbonate bedrock had some sort of karst feature. So that tells us basically that at any point that you puncture this sort of carbonate bedrock, you're quite likely to be hitting some sort of fracture or cave or crevice or very crumbled, permeable bedrock. Next slide, please. So finally, this isn't bedrock, but a couple other considerations that are very important for our consideration in our water quality monitoring and some of the other work we do are the depth of the soil to the bedrock. As you can see in this map, the vast majority of Crawford County is quite shallow soils to bedrock. Anything that's orange and red is less than 5.5 feet to bedrock, so not much soil remediation of pollutants before it goes into those direct conduits to groundwater. Next slide, please. And slope, of course, particularly here in the driftless area, is a very important consideration for us to be looking at when we're talking about water flows. As you can see on this map, where black is flat and the lighter the color, the steeper the slopes. Here in Crawford County, we're dealing with some of the most rugged landscapes in the state, which makes it very beautiful, but also a complicated landscape to be working on. So I will be passing things off now that we have a bedrock foundation of the hydrogeology to Omaru Eras.
Hi, everybody. I'm Omaru Eras. I'm the current water quality monitoring coordinator for Crawford Stewardship Project. And well, I want to talk about a little bit to what the connection the Karst has with water quality monitoring. Well, a brief description of the program. Well, it's a citizen science-based program, and we've been doing water quality monitoring for a decade with the WAV program and other organizations. And we are currently monitoring 7 sites of major concern in Crawford County, which is, again, southwest Wisconsin. We also get the help of at least 10 super engaged and wonderful volunteers every year. And I want to say thanks to them. And well, let's let's see how we relate water quality monitoring with karst geology. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a map of the Kickapoo Valley, which is South Crawford County. And we can, this map was taken from our Karst survey program. And we can see the slopes, right, that we can find in the driftless area. And here we have on your right the watershed boundaries. We have sinkholes that are in red, and we have two main drainage areas running down to the Kickapoo River. And the Kickapoo River is a tributary of the Wisconsin River. Well, why are we considering this? Because we are always looking for sites of major concern. What's that? Well, we learned that there are plans to start spreading 5 to 6 million of gallons of manure at some point. So in all this area, so we decided to look on the survey program, and then we discovered all this geology. So we decided to start monitoring the sites. I don't know if you can see the dots in orange. Those are sites that we chose according to this landscape and this area. So we went there, we were looking, we were observing those sites, and we realized that the dots 1 and 2 are like our streams where water disappears and reappears. So that means those sites are clearly connecting surface and groundwater. The dot number 3 is a spring right next to that one of those streams and one of the main drainage areas. And well, we started getting water samples, and the results were extremely high. Results specifically for E. coli and total phosphorus already. In this area, the main human activities is like small farms with cows, crops, and we also noticed that they've been extremely affected by the high rainfalls, runoff, and flood events. Okay, next slide, please. So how do we do this? How do we do the monitoring of sites of concern? Well, there are different ways, but what do we monitor for? We use, obviously, the WAV basic parameters, the level 1 parameters. And we also test for E. coli, total phosphorus, background bacteria. What is that? We don't know. It could be anything. We've gotten, in the last few years, millions and millions of background bacteria. And that could be Salmonella, Cryptosporidium, who knows? We don't have the resources to test for more than we do right now, but well, so we test also for antibiotic resistant bacteria. We found resistance to chloramphenicol mainly. We also do the source tracking tests, so we can find the source of fecal species and fungi as well. Well, so now the different ways we do monitoring could go from using a syringe in a spring to get the spring water, or a sampling pole from a bridge. We don't really have access to all the sites. Sometimes we have to walk a long time with all the equipment. We have to sample from bridges as well, from little slopes. The rivers having changed, the streams, sorry, having changing a lot due to runoff and erosion. Last year, I noticed that some streams changed their size 3 times. Okay, so we also need protection, lots of protection, gloves, masks, alcohol, chlorine, antibacterial gel, everything. We need to protect ourselves and sanitize before and after monitoring sessions. And that's I really recommend this, that if you go out and do monitoring, protect yourself very well. Our volunteers haven't been sick yet, but we know about cases in the lower Wisconsin River where there's been people infected with bacteria resistant to antibiotics. Okay, next slide, please. Let's see. This is an example of the results we've been getting throughout the years since 2009. So this is for 3 sites that we've been monitoring since then. Mostly the lines in blue and in green. The line in purple represents a spring. We decided to start monitoring springs as well last year because we need to know what's the quality of that water that is joining the surface and feeding the streams. This is also how we can relate our monitoring with the karst geology. Okay, so we have one zone, the zone 2. We have 3 zones, but right now we're gonna talk about the zone 2. And this is E. coli results. As you can see in the vertical axis, we have E. coli levels, so, or amount of E. coli that goes from 0 up to 5,000 colony forming units per 100 milliliters. In the horizontal axis, you can see the month and the year, the results, well, when the samples and the results were taken. And here we can see the results struggling to go below the standard, which is 126 colony forming units per 100 milliliters. And this is just a way to show you how the results have been changing and the E. coli levels have been increasing over time. So in the next slide, we can see that we changed the number of colony forming units of E. coli from 0 up all the way up to 170,000, which is the highest, our record of E. coli levels we got. And that this happened last year. So as you can see, if we see the graph, almost all the other results from previous years disappear. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, same with phosphorus. We can see this is the chart for total phosphorus results. So the highest we've been getting on that side is 1.39 milligrams per liter. Again, our results, most of our results go beyond the standard, which is 0.075 milligrams per liter. So this is how I can show you the quality of the places we've been monitoring that are susceptible to be greatly impacted. And these 3 sites, I didn't say this before, they were chosen according to the Karst perspective plus, because in that area, there's 3 million of gallons of manure being spread every year. So we can see the results of those practices and the high rainfall runoffs, erosion, flood events, and so on. So sometimes when we go monitoring in manure spreading season, the water is literally stinky, brown, and muddy. So yeah, we have to sanitize ourselves very well too. Well, thank you. Thank you much. If you have any questions, you can write them down in the chat. Next slide, please. And yeah, do that before the fish are dead. Thank you. Our coordinator, Eli, is coming next.
All right, thank you, Omaru. Next slide, please.
Oh, I'll just quickly break in and say we'll go over a few more minutes just because we got a little bit of a late start, but thank you.
Yep, this is just the last section. We'll wrap it up. I'll try to be brief. All right, so thank you, everyone. I'm Eli Mandel, Community Engagement Coordinator with Crawford Stewardship Project. We are hoping this last part can be more of an open discussion. I know we are kind of short on time, so please type questions as they arise. Now we would like to broaden the scope and understanding of some of the connections between health of our watersheds and our aquifers. Here we see a juxtaposition of differing land use practices. Think about how these different practices could affect the health of our waterways and our groundwater. The picture shown here is a fairly typical picture of 2 land uses here that we see in Southwest Wisconsin. We wanted to highlight how vulnerable landscapes can compound unsustainable land use practices. Next slide. We would like to bring your attention to the connectedness between our sensitive karst landscape features and the health of our watersheds and groundwater. Here in Southwest Wisconsin, we have a diverse rural economy with rugged, steep terrains, resulting in lots of diverse land uses and resulting difficulties. Runoff from these steep slopes creates erosion and contamination issues throughout our ridges, valleys, and waterways. Compounding the issue, as pointed out before, is our shallow depth of soil to our dissolving, fractured karst bedrock. So what impact does this have on our surface water quality? In Southwest Wisconsin, we have some of the most beautiful landscapes in the world. Because of our cold water-fed springs, streams, and rivers, we have abundant and healthy aquatic ecosystems. If well protected, our water is abundant and clean, including some of the best trout fishing in the world. The interconnectedness of our surface and groundwater makes these beautiful waterways very vulnerable to our land use practices. With the increasing severity and frequency of heavy precipitation events, our changing climate is worsening driftless Wisconsin's existing hydrogeological sensitivities. Once our groundwater is polluted, our aquifers will be compromised for the foreseeable future. And unfortunately, in the last few years, we have seen waterways polluted by manure spills, septic systems, flooding, and nutrient runoff and infiltration. So what effects does this have on our groundwater health and our aquifers? Well, historically, we are lacking data on the health of our groundwater here in Southwest Wisconsin. Crawford Stewardship Project has been advocating for well testing and hydrogeological studies of our watersheds and groundwater for a decade. Luckily, there are several such studies happening in Southwest Wisconsin right now, but we still need more data. The health of our surface water and the connected groundwater is paramount for the health of our rural communities. We all need clean groundwater. So this brings us to some of the work that our organization does and what we advocate for. Sustainable land use and diverse land use. It is so important to have diverse land practices that protect the health of our waterways and our groundwater aquifers. This means we have to face the realities of our ever-changing landscapes and adapt our land use practices based on best use practices for the health of our communities, landscapes, and watersheds. This is why Crawford Stewardship Project promotes diverse and sustainable relation with our land and waterways. We believe through conservation practices, diverse living land covers, and regenerative agriculture, we can protect both our surface and groundwater, build diverse and healthy soil, and feed our communities. Specific protections for vulnerable karst landscapes could further keep our waterways clean and beautiful. We strive here at Crawford Stewardship Project for the vision of empowered communities in sustainable relationship with thriving ecosystems. Thank you very much for being part of this presentation, and we are very grateful.
Yep, so not seeing any questions yet. So those of you, oh, I just won now.
Sorry, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to take any questions. We need to set up for the next session in the next few minutes here.
Yep.
But thank you very much. That was a great presentation. The next session will begin at 2:35. I tried posting the link there, but it didn't hyperlink to the schedule. If you're remaining in the stream, you can stay right here using the same link. But if you're changing streams, please click on Leave Meeting and return to the virtual agenda to find a different session. But thank you.
Great, thanks so much. If you could just go to the next slide real quick so that people can see our contact information.
I will make sure that your emails are put into the chat box.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.